The metal tray hit the table with a loud clang. Every conversation in the prison cafeteria died instantly. Marcus, the beast, stood there, towering over the new inmate, his shadow stretching across the table like a warning. "Eat fast," he said coldly, leaning closer, "or don't eat at all." No one laughed. No one moved. Because everyone inside Black Ridge Prison knew one thing. When Marcus picked someone, it wasn't a joke. It was a sentence. The new inmate didn't respond. He didn't flinch, didn't even look up right away. He just kept eating, slow, steady, like the chaos around him didn't exist. That alone made people nervous. Marcus narrowed his eyes. "You think you're special?" Still nothing. A few inmates at nearby tables started whispering. "Who is that guy? Why isn't he reacting? Man, he's either crazy or dead already." Finally, the new inmate lifted his gaze. Calm eyes. No fear, no anger, just stillness. "I'm just trying to eat," he said quietly. That calm tone, it didn't match the situation, and that's what made it dangerous. Marcus smirked, cracking his neck. "You don't get it, do you? In here, you earn your place, and right now, you're at the bottom." From the far corner of the cafeteria, an older inmate leaned forward, squinting. His face changed. "Wait a second," he whispered. "I've seen that guy before." The man next to him frowned. "Where?" The older inmate didn't answer right away. His eyes stayed locked on the new prisoner. Then he said it, low, almost unsure. "That's Steven Seagal." The name spread like a ripple. "What? No way! Here, in this prison?" But Marcus just laughed. "Steven who?" he scoffed. "I don't care if he's famous. In here, he's nothing." He grabbed the edge of the table and slammed it forward slightly, rattling the tray. "Look at me when I'm talking to you." Slowly, the new inmate stood up. Not aggressive, not rushed, just controlled. The room held its breath, because something about this moment felt different, like a line had just been crossed, and whatever happened next was going to change everything. Black Ridge Prison wasn't just a place for criminals. It was a system built on pressure, fear, and unspoken rules. And at the center of it all was one man, Marcus, the Beast. He didn't wear a badge, didn't hold any official authority, but everyone, guards included, knew he controlled the rhythm of the place. If Marcus said you ate, you ate. If Marcus said you stayed silent, you stayed silent. And if Marcus decided you were a problem, you didn't last long. That morning had started like any other. Steel doors slamming, chains clinking, voices echoing through concrete halls. But then the main gate opened, and something changed. A new inmate stepped inside. No resistance, no struggle, no fear. Just a steady walk forward. It was Steven Seagal. Dressed in a standard prison uniform, he didn't look like someone important. No tattoos covering his arms, no loud attitude trying to prove dominance, no nervous energy either. Just calm. Too calm. One guard glanced at the file in his hand, then back at Steven. "You ever seen someone walk in like that?" he muttered. Another guard shook his head. "Usually they're angry or scared. This one? He looks like he's exactly where he wants to be." As Steven moved through the intake corridor, inmates behind the bars watched closely. Some banged lightly on the metal, trying to get his attention. Others just stared in silence. There was something about him they couldn't quite understand. An older inmate near cell block C leaned forward, gripping the bars. His eyes narrowed. "That face," he murmured. "I know that face." Down in the yard, Marcus was already hearing whispers. New guy just came in. Quiet type. Didn't say a word to anyone. Marcus smirked as he sat on the bench, cracking his knuckles slowly. "Quiet ones," he said, "are the easiest to break." His crew laughed, but one of them hesitated. "Something's off, though," he added. People are talking about him like he's different. Marcus stood up, stretching his shoulders. Different? He scoffed. In this place, everyone's the same. But even as he said it, something in the air felt unusual. Back inside, Stephen was led to his cell. The guard unlocked the door and stepped aside. "This is you." Stephen nodded once and walked in. No questions, no complaints, just acceptance. His cellmate, a thin man with nervous eyes, backed up slightly. "Hey, you new?" Stephen gave a small nod. The man swallowed. "Listen, just some advice. Stay out of Marcus's way. He runs this place." Stephen sat down on the edge of the bed. Calm, focused. "Does he?" he replied quietly. The cellmate blinked, unsure how to respond. Yeah, he does. Everyone knows that." Stephen didn't argue, didn't react. He simply looked around the small cell, as if observing every detail, every sound, every movement, like he was studying the environment, not fearing it. Hours passed, and by lunchtime, everyone was waiting, because news had spread. The quiet new inmate, the one who didn't act like a prisoner, the one some people were starting to recognize. And in Black Ridge Prison, recognition could be dangerous. As Stephen stepped into the cafeteria, conversation slowed. Eyes followed him, some curious, some cautious, some already predicting what would happen next. Because there was only one way this story could go. Sooner or later, Marcus, the Beast, would make his move, and when he did, there would be no avoiding it. But what no one realized yet was that this wasn't just another new inmate, and this wasn't going to be just another prison lesson. This time, the lesson was going the other way.
Now tell me, if you were in that prison, would you stay quiet or stand your ground? And where are you watching from? Drop your country below.
Lunch hour at Black Ridge Prison wasn't just about food. It was about power. It was where lines were drawn and where they were crossed. The cafeteria buzzed with noise, trays sliding, men talking, chairs scraping against the floor. But the moment Steven Seagal stepped in, something shifted. Conversations lowered. Eyes followed him. Not openly. No one wanted attention, but enough to feel it. Stephen didn't react. He took a tray, moved calmly through the line, and chose a seat in the far corner. Alone. That was the first mistake, or at least that's what everyone thought. Because in Black Ridge, sitting alone didn't mean peace. It meant vulnerability. Across the room, Marcus noticed immediately. He leaned back in his chair, watching. "There he is," one of his men muttered. Marcus smirked. "Yeah, I see him." He stood up slowly, grabbing his tray, his crew falling in behind him like shadows. The closer he got, the quieter the room became. By the time Marcus reached the table, you could hear a spoon drop from across the hall. He slammed his tray down hard. The sound echoed like a warning shot. Stephen didn't look up right away. He took one more bite, set his fork down neatly, and then raised his eyes. Calm, unshaken. Marcus tilted his head, studying him. "You new here?" he asked, his tone low but heavy with threat. "Yes," Stephen replied simply. No stutter, no hesitation, just one word. That alone threw Marcus off balance for a split second, but he covered it with a laugh. "You got rules in here," Marcus continued. "You follow them, or you learn the hard way." Stephen held his gaze. Rules without respect don't last long. A few inmates exchanged glances. That was not the answer anyone expected. Marcus's smile faded slightly. "You think you're smart?" he snapped. Stephen shook his head lightly. "No, just observant." The tension thickened. Marcus leaned forward, placing both hands on the table. "You observe this," he growled. In one sudden movement, he grabbed Stephen by the collar and yanked him upward. Gasps rippled through the cafeteria. Chairs shifted. Some inmates stood halfway, unsure whether to watch or look away. This was it, the moment everyone had been waiting for. Marcus pulled his fist back, ready to strike, but it never landed, because in the same instant, Stephen moved. Not fast in a dramatic way, not flashy, just precise. His hand rose calmly, intercepting Marcus's wrist mid-air, a slight twist, a subtle shift of balance, and suddenly, everything changed. Marcus's expression went from aggression to confusion, then to shock. His body turned against his will, his arm locked in place, and before anyone could process what was happening, Marcus was on his knees, frozen, controlled, completely helpless. The entire cafeteria stood still. What just happened? No way. Did he even try? Stephen remained standing, his grip firm but effortless, his face unchanged. No anger, no excitement, just control. He leaned slightly closer and spoke in a calm, steady voice. You shouldn't mistake silence for weakness. Marcus struggled, trying to break free, but the more he moved, the tighter the hold became. Pain flashed across his face, real pain, not the kind he was used to giving, but the kind he had never experienced before. Let go, Marcus hissed. Stephen studied him for a brief second. Then, just as calmly as it began, he released him. Marcus stumbled backward, catching himself on the table, breathing hard, disoriented, humiliated. No one laughed, no one spoke, because no one had ever seen Marcus like this, ever. Stephen adjusted his sleeve slightly, as if nothing unusual had happened. Then he sat back down and continued eating, like it was just another ordinary moment. The silence in the cafeteria wasn't fear anymore. It was something else, something new. Respect. Marcus stood there frozen, his mind racing, trying to understand, trying to process. But deep down, he already knew one thing. This wasn't over. Not even close.
By the time lunch ended, the story had already spread, not just across the cafeteria, across the entire prison. The beast got dropped. No fight, just one move. They say he couldn't even stand, and the new guy didn't even break a sweat. The whispers moved through hallways, echoed in cells, and bounced off cold concrete walls. And at the center of every conversation was one name, Steven Seagal. Some inmates were impressed, some were confused, and others worried. Because in a place like Blackridge, power doesn't just disappear, it fights back. Inside his cell, Marcus sat on the edge of his bed, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. For the first time in years, he wasn't angry. He was thinking. The moment replayed in his head again and again. The grab, the counter, the pain, the helplessness. It didn't make sense. I've fought bigger guys, stronger guys, he muttered under his breath. But that wasn't strength. One of his crew members stood by the bars, hesitant. You want us to handle him? He asked quietly. Marcus didn't answer right away. His jaw tightened. No, he finally said. I'll handle him myself. But his voice lacked something it never had before, certainty. Across the block, Stephen sat in his cell, eyes closed, breathing slow and steady, like the chaos around him didn't exist. His cellmate watched nervously. You really shouldn't have done that, he whispered. Stephen opened his eyes slightly. Done what? Humiliated Marcus, the man replied. He won't let that go, not here. Stephen didn't respond immediately. He simply looked toward the small window where a faint beam of light cut through the darkness. Some people, he said calmly, need to face themselves before they can face others. The cellmate frowned, not fully understanding, but he felt it. That same calm, that same control. That evening the prison yard opened. Groups gathered like always, but something had changed. The usual noise was lower, the energy heavier. People were watching, waiting. Marcus stepped into the yard, his presence still commanding attention, but now mixed with curiosity. Was he still the same man, or had something shifted? He spotted Stephen instantly, standing near the fence, alone, again, calm, always calm. Marcus walked toward him slowly, no shouting this time, no sudden moves, just measured steps. When he got close, he stopped a few feet away. For a moment, neither of them spoke. "You embarrassed me," Marcus said lowly. Stephen met his gaze. "You challenged me." Marcus clenched his fists. "You think this is over?" Stephen shook his head slightly. "No, I think this is just beginning." The words weren't a threat, they were a fact, and somehow that made them heavier. Marcus leaned in closer. "Tonight," he said quietly, "yard's gonna be empty." A pause. No guards, no interruptions. Stephen didn't react. "I'll be there," he replied simply. The tension spread instantly. Inmates who overheard it passed it along. "Tonight, it's happening, round 2. But this time, no witnesses to stop it." Some were excited, others were uneasy, because something about this didn't feel like a normal prison fight. It felt bigger, more dangerous, more final. Night fell slowly over Blackridge, lights dimmed, doors locked, but in the shadows, movement began. Marcus gathered his closest men, not just one-on-one this time. He wasn't taking chances. "This ends tonight," he said firmly. Meanwhile, Stephen stood alone in his cell, waiting, not pacing, not preparing in any visible way, just ready, like he had already seen how this would play out. And as the clock ticked closer to midnight, one thing became clear to everyone watching from behind bars and cracks in doors. Marcus wasn't just planning to win, he was planning to prove something. To himself, to the prison, to the man who had taken his power without even trying. But what Marcus still didn't understand is this: some fights aren't decided by strength, and some opponents have already won before the fight even begins.
Midnight settled over Blackridge like a heavy blanket. The prison was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of silence that meant something was about to happen. Out in the yard, the lights flickered faintly, casting long shadows across the concrete. A few cell windows had figures pressed against them, watching, waiting, because word had spread. This wasn't just a fight anymore. This was a moment. Marcus stepped into the yard first, his jaw tight, his fists clenched. 3 men stood behind him, bigger, tougher, and loyal. No mistakes this time, no surprises, or at least that's what he believed. A few seconds later, Steven Seagal walked in, alone. Same calm expression, same steady steps, like he was walking into nothing more than a quiet conversation. Marcus shook his head almost in disbelief. "You really showed up," he said. Steven stopped a few feet away. "You asked." Marcus let out a short laugh. "You still think this is a game?" Steven's voice remained even. "No, I think this is a choice." Marcus's patience snapped. Enough talking. He signaled his men. "Take him." The 3 rushed forward at once, fast, aggressive, coordinated. From the cells above, inmates leaned closer, expecting chaos. But what happened next didn't look like a fight. It looked like control. The first man swung wildly. Steven stepped slightly to the side, minimal movement, and redirected the force. The man stumbled forward and hit the ground hard. Before the second could react, Steven turned, a quick shift of his wrist, a precise strike to balance, not harm. The second man dropped, gasping, unable to stand properly. The third hesitated for just a fraction of a second. That was enough. Steven moved in, not with anger, but with timing. Within seconds, all 3 were down. Not unconscious, not seriously hurt, just completely neutralized. The yard fell silent. Even the night air felt still. Marcus stood frozen, his backup gone in seconds. No struggle, no real fight, just effortless control. This isn't possible, Marcus muttered. Stephen looked at him calmly. It is. You're just seeing it clearly now. Marcus roared and charged forward, this time faster than before, stronger, desperate. He threw everything he had into that moment. But Stephen didn't match his force. He absorbed it, redirected it, like water flowing around stone. Marcus swung, missed, tried again, blocked. Then, in one smooth motion, Stephen stepped in, turned slightly, and brought Marcus down, hard but controlled, pinned, face to the ground, unable to move. The same position, the same helplessness, but this time there was no crowd, no noise, just truth. Marcus struggled, but it was useless. Every movement only tightened the hold. "Why can't I move?" he gritted. Stephen leaned slightly closer, his voice calm, almost quiet enough to miss. "Because you're fighting with anger, not understanding." Marcus's resistance slowed, not because he wanted to stop, but because he had no choice. For the first time in his life, power wasn't working, strength wasn't enough, and fear belonged to him now. Stephen held the position for a moment longer. Then, slowly, he let go. Marcus stayed on the ground, breathing heavily, staring at the concrete, defeated, not just physically, but mentally. Stephen stepped back. No celebration, no dominance, just silence. And in that silence, everyone watching understood something had changed forever.
What would you do in Marcus's place? Fight again, or finally walk away? And be honest, did you expect that fight to end this way? Morning came slowly to Black Ridge Prison. But something was different. The usual tension in the air was lighter, quieter, like the walls themselves had witnessed something they couldn't ignore. Inmates stepped out of their cells, but the usual noise, shouting, arguing, posturing, was missing. Instead, there were glances, whispers, respectful distance, and at the center of it all was Steven Seagal. Marcus walked into the yard later than usual. No crew, no loud entrance, no attempts to reclaim attention, just walking. A few inmates noticed immediately. That's him, the beast. But their tone had changed. It wasn't fear anymore. It was curiosity. Marcus stopped near the bench where he used to sit like a king. He looked at it for a moment, then kept walking. That alone told everyone something had shifted. Across the yard, Stephen stood near the fence, hands relaxed at his sides, watching. Not in a controlling way, just aware. Marcus approached him slowly. Each step felt heavier than the last. This wasn't a confrontation. This was something harder. Admitting the truth. When he finally stopped in front of Stephen, there was a long silence. No tension, no aggression, just two men standing face to face. Marcus exhaled. "I've been in this place a long time," he said. Stephen didn't interrupt. "I thought I understood how it worked. Strength, fear, control." He shook his head slightly. But last night, none of that mattered. Stephen's gaze remained steady. "Because it wasn't real control," he replied calmly. Marcus looked up. For the first time, there was no anger in his eyes, only honesty. "I was wrong," he said. The words felt unfamiliar coming out of his mouth, heavy but real. Around them, a few inmates slowed their movements, pretending not to watch, but they were listening. This mattered. Stephen studied Marcus for a moment, not judging, just observing. Knowing that is where real strength begins. Marcus let out a quiet breath. "I don't want to run this place like that anymore." It wasn't a dramatic statement, No grand speech, just a simple truth. Stephen nodded once. Then don't. Later that day, the change became visible. A small argument broke out near the food line. Normally, that would have escalated instantly. But this time, Marcus stepped in. Not with force, not with threats. Enough, he said firmly. The two inmates stopped, not out of fear, but because something in his tone had changed. It wasn't aggressive, it was controlled. They backed off, and just like that, the situation ended. No fight, no chaos, just calm. Word spread quickly. Marcus didn't swing, he just stopped it. Since when does he do that? But those who had seen the night before understood. This wasn't weakness, it was transformation. Inside the cell block, even the guards noticed. One of them leaned toward another. What happened to him? The other shrugged. Maybe he finally met someone stronger. But it wasn't just strength. It was something deeper. That evening, Marcus sat quietly on his bunk. No crew around him, no noise, just his thoughts. For years, he had built his identity on fear, on being untouchable. But one night, one man had shown him a different way. And strangely, it felt better, lighter, like he didn't have to prove anything anymore. Across the block, Stephen sat the same way he always did, calm, still, unchanged. His presence hadn't taken over the prison, it hadn't demanded attention, but it had shifted something, a mindset, a direction, a possibility. Because real power doesn't force change, it inspires it. As lights dimmed and the prison settled for the night, Black Ridge felt different. Not safer, not perfect, but better. And all because one man chose control over chaos, and another chose to learn instead of fight. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new tests, but one thing was certain now. The balance of power had changed, not through fear, but through respect. By the time the final day settled into Black Ridge Prison, the atmosphere had transformed in ways no one could fully explain. The walls were still the same, the guards still carried their routines, the gates still locked with the same heavy clang, but the energy inside was different, quieter, more aware, more human. And at the center of that subtle shift stood Steven Seagal, not as a ruler, not as a challenger, but as a reminder of something deeper than power. What Marcus had once believed was strength had been redefined. For years, he thought control came from fear, that respect had to be taken, that dominance was proven through intimidation. But what he experienced in those brief, decisive moments changed everything. He learned that fear may silence people, but it never earns their trust. And without trust, control is always temporary. Across the yard, Marcus now moved differently. He no longer needed to walk with his chest pushed forward or his voice raised to be heard. People noticed him, but not because they feared him, because they recognized the change. Inmates who once avoided eye contact now nodded as they passed, not out of obligation, but acknowledgement, a silent understanding that something had shifted. One afternoon, a minor conflict began to build near the exercise area. Two inmates stepped toward each other, voices rising, tension building, old patterns ready to repeat. But before it escalated, Marcus stepped in, not aggressively, not loudly, just firmly. Stop. The word was simple, but it carried weight. Both inmates paused, looked at him, and stepped back. No threats were needed, no force was used, just presence, just clarity. And that moment alone showed how much had truly changed. Stephen observed from a distance. He didn't interfere, didn't intervene, because he didn't need to. The lesson had already been learned, and now it was being applied. Later that evening, Marcus approached Stephen one final time. There was no crowd around them, no audience, just two men standing in quiet understanding. "I get it now," Marcus said. Stephen looked at him calmly. "Good." Marcus nodded slowly. "I spent years trying to be feared, but it never felt right." Stephen replied, "Because it isn't." A pause, then Marcus asked, "So what is real power?" Stephen didn't answer immediately. He looked around the yard, at the inmates, the guards, the stillness, then said, "Real power is control over yourself. Everything else follows." Marcus absorbed that in silence. For the first time, he wasn't trying to win anything. He was trying to understand. As days passed, the prison didn't turn into a perfect place. It didn't become free of conflict overnight. But small changes began to add up. Arguments de-escalated faster. People spoke with less hostility. And respect became something that didn't require enforcement. It was simply present. And Stephen? He remained the same. Calm, observant, unshaken. Not because he was trying to be different, but because he already understood who he was. The story inside Black Ridge Prison became more than just a moment of conflict. It became a lesson passed quietly from one person to another, a reminder that strength without control is chaos, and control without ego is true mastery. If there's one takeaway from this story, it's this: you don't need to prove your strength by overpowering others. The strongest people are those who can remain calm when tested and choose discipline over reaction, because in the end, respect is not demanded, it's reflected. Thanks for watching this story till the end. More powerful and engaging videos are coming soon, so stay tuned. Now tell us in the comments, which part did you enjoy the most, and what kind of stories would you like to see next? Your feedback helps us improve and create better content for you.